I'll be the first person to admit that I've been wrong about a lot of things in the past. Generally speaking, though, I think whenever I'm wrong about something, it's because I go against my natural inclination and I try to view a situation from what would people do if they were acting in their rational self interest, which is more or less always a mistake. This is a particular area of weakness for mainstream conservatives, libertarians, and the couple economic socialists who are left who think that people act in a way that will maximize their utility, maximize their profit, etc. And then that trumps any sort of ideological motivation or worldview motivation. So when conservatives look at a lot of left wing things, they'll go, they're in on a grift, they're trying to get government funding, they're trying to do something that will drive their competitors out of business because they can't afford the same environmental regulations or diversity requirements. Or they'll even look at it from a perspective of liberals didn't have children, so they're trying to bring in immigrants to pay their pensions. They tend to assume, I think very wrongly, that ultimately people have some sort of a goal that makes sense. If I can use the extremely overused example from The Dark Knight, there's the concept of the person who isn't interested in money, they just want to watch the world burn. Or rather, someone who's so interested in their ideology or their worldview or something like that, that rational concerns are just a distant second to that, and they will do anything in pursuit of their ideology. Maybe there will be some remnants of self-preservation, and you can see this with some of the Martha Vineyard stuff or the New York City stuff, where they will lay waste to the rest of the country, but withdraw to their personal fortresses. But on the whole, I don't think you can really view it from any sort of self-preservation instinct or rational self-interest instinct. And this brings us to a point of a friendly disagreement I always have with my friend Serp, who tends to be more of a collapse limits to growth person, and I tend to be more of a status quo person. So for my part, I think you cannot overestimate the system's resilience, and that things will continue on as they've been going if there's any possibility of them continuing on as going in an ideological and political sense, and economics will be pushed to a side, and it doesn't matter how bad things get from that perspective, the status quo will be maintained. Whereas SERP thinks that the limits to growth or economic issues or whatever will eventually lead to a societal collapse in the foreseeable future, whereas I tend to think that it'll just kind of go on the way it is indefinitely. Now, part of that is also based on where you live in the world. I live in Canada, where we just have so many natural resources, and we have things like an immigration system that favors skilled workers. So the impending doom is not nearly as prevalent here as it is in some European countries or parts of the United States. I think ultimately, if it comes down to a choice between self-preservation of their society, their way of life, or even their family, and fulfilling their ideological goals, they will always choose the latter. That they will willingly submit their children to be raped by refugees in order to fulfill their desire to appear tolerant. And they will even, to a certain extent, present their own necks to being slit rather than going against their worldview. And I think this is perhaps the mistake that Russia made when they invaded the Ukraine, is they expected a certain degree of rational self-interest. They thought that the Ukraine didn't really matter ultimately to the West, and they wouldn't back it nearly as much as they did. In the face of hyperinflation and all kinds of other issues, you have Western countries that are donating billions and billions of dollars to the Ukraine that they can't afford. In many cases, while their people are going hungry or facing deprivations, but they will continue to do that, regardless of how it impacts them financially. Similarly, Russia, I think foolishly in my opinion, and we'll see how this goes, I could be wrong again, felt that if they cut off natural gas and they cut off oil and they dramatically raised prices in Europe, that eventually the realities of the suffering of it would lead to some sort of change. that Germany or Britain or whoever would stop supporting the Ukraine in the face of immense financial pressure on its people. I don't think that's the case. I think, and once again, I could be wrong, that there is no limit that they will not go in this conflict. That even if large portions of the country are cold and suffering frostbite, they will continue on this current path because, in their worldview, Russia is this reactionary, Christian, nationalist, neo Nazi fascist state, and Ukraine is this multicultural, diverse country that's going to legalize gay marriage. And that is all that matters, is to fight their ideological proxy battle, and nothing at home is even really relevant by comparison. I think another example of this kind of thinking is the whole concept of the environmentalist movement. Now, as I've been saying for a long time, and one of the reasons I was so against the narrative of global warming is my thought process was if any of these people actually believed that things were as bad as they say they were, they would have taken dramatic action by now. If Obama actually thought that the world was going to end in the next 5 years due to the sea levels rising, he would have told the US Army to blow up coal plants. And the truth of the matter is, even if all of the environmentalist things are as bad as people say they are, if implementing any environmentalist policy really threatens the current system, it will not be implemented. Any real attempt at decarbonizing the economy or switching over to some sort of localism would decrease global cultural cross contamination. It would decrease international trade. It would decrease immigration. And I don't think under any circumstances they would actually do that. Decarbonizing the economy to the degree they want would likewise decrease globalization. So I think they pay a lot of lip service to that kind of thing. But ultimately, I don't think they're willing to act on any of it. And it's just a lot of smoke and mirrors. What money is spent on it is not in any real sense being trying to use to solve environmental problems. It's to be given to organizations that serve their ideological interests as a way of pushing their agenda forward. I don't think if the choice was that the oceans would rise up and destroy the world, or there was a moratorium on immigration for a year, I think they would take the first one. I don't think there's any degree to which you can underestimate the ideological conviction and suicidality of these people. And a thing we hear a lot is the whole go woke, go broke thing, where there's some people take the perspective that woke stuff is less successful than non-woke stuff, and companies lose money by going that way. And I think that generally speaking is the case. I think people don't like any of these products that are being produced, and most of them wind up losing money. And especially if we get into the stuff that's made for online streaming, they will just take pre-existing material and just shove it as many diverse casting decisions and as much just neoliberal left-wing stuff as they can. And it doesn't matter if it makes money. It doesn't matter that the business model doesn't make sense. They would rather go bankrupt and live on the street than have to acknowledge reality and create things that people actually want to watch. I remember recently when Top Gun Maverick came out, which in and of itself has a lot of affirmative action in it and has a lot of diversity quotas, but it was not considered to be left-wing enough. And so a lot of people were saying this movie's out of touch, this movie doesn't appeal to the average person, even though it made a ton of money, and a lot of their other nonsense makes no money, no one watches it, no one cares. But like I said, I think Disney, there is no limit to the amount of money they will pour into unprofitable ventures. They were willing to destroy Star Wars, one of the most productive franchises in human history, on the basis of their political ideology. And I don't think that there's any limit to this. Of course, you have Rings of Power, which cost, $1 billion to make. Anybody with half a brain could tell that was never going to make back the money put up, even a fraction the money put up, let alone turn a profit. It was very clear the reason for this. But Jeff Bezos was just willing to throw the money away. And who knows, they'll probably make a season 2. Maybe they'll buy something else and some other big product and make a gay version of that as well. But I just don't think you can count on impending bankruptcy or personal ruin or even concern for personal safety as any kind of limit on how ideologically driven and how ideologically committed these people are. And so I don't think there's going to be a societal collapse in the foreseeable future. And it's kind of when we get into the whole idea is who is the optimist and who is the pessimist here. Am I the optimist or the pessimist for thinking that the current society is just going to go on indefinitely and it's going to get more and more paused and we're going to go from trans people to trans species to formally legalizing pedophilia or wherever the next stop on the train is, and it's just going to keep getting worse and worse? Or is that pessimistic or is that optimistic? Or is Sir pessimistic or optimistic by believing that this can't go on forever and eventually it's going to collapse and it's going to end? I mean, it's very much an open question. I tend to see millenarianism as being more driven by wish fulfillment than by any kind of fear that people are so miserable in their daily lives that they want the apocalypse to come and to save them from the pain of living, from the harshness of their society, sometimes just from ennui or boredom. As I like to say, the only thing worse than an apocalypse is an apocalypse that doesn't happen. The only thing worse than doomsday is a doomsday that's put off indefinitely. But I mean, doomsday is going to be a horrific event of mass poverty, starvation, disease, people killing each other, but it'll mean an end to the indefinite decay of society. So once again, it's who is the optimist and who is the pessimist here. I know there's that comic where the guy's holding a sign that says the end is nigh and the other person goes naive optimist or something like that. So for my part, I don't think you can underestimate how dedicated these people are or how powerful they are. I do think whatever countries, be it because of self-interest or because of parochialism or because whatever it is, every country is eventually just going to give in. Every country will legalize gay marriage. Every country will have open borders to immigration. Every country will just culturally blend itself out. We think that China and Japan aren't going to do this, but I think they're just a couple decades behind. We're already seeing Taiwan go in this direction. India is heading in this direction. The few remaining African countries who are kind of religious or are kind of socially conservative, I think will eventually, one way or another, just cave in. It could be like it was in Colombia and a lot of South America, wherein people signed on to the Pan American Court, and then the Pan American Court told everyone they had to legalize gay marriage. Or in the case of Colombia, they passed a constitutional amendment banning it, but the Supreme Court overturned it and legalized it. Like, I think, regardless of what it takes, be it a Supreme Court, be it a military invasion, be it economic sanctions, be it some sort of 24-hour op involving mass media or something like that, these countries will be brought to heel. They will accept the system and they will participate in perpetuating it at all costs. Now, will there be pushback against this? Of course. Will I support the pushback? Yes. Roe v. Wade got overturned. Italy elected a relatively good government. The fact that I'm extremely pessimistic about the future really has no bearing on how we act in the present. Because if you can do certain things in the present, like end the genocide of the unborn, if you can have basic law and order enforced, maybe reduce affirmative action, try to at least get a handle on some of the horrendous things that are happening. You have to live in this society. Your family members have to live in it. Your friends have to live in it. Your children are going to have to grow up in it. So you should try to make it better if possible. Who knows? Maybe something will change in the future. Maybe I'm going to be wrong. But Roe v. Wade being overturned means that maybe hundreds of thousands of babies aren't going to be killed. So, I mean, that is an achievement. Even if eventually the US does just become clown world and things get worse and worse, and all the remaining red states just fully buy onto it, I mean, that's still something. Even if your country is controlled by like affirmative action and stuff, if they at least punish criminals, then that's something. I mean, you just kind of got to take what you can get at a certain point in time. Maybe some opportunity will come and you'll have like a decent government that comes to power, either electorally or through a military coup or something, and things can actually change. I'm very disbelieving on that account. I mean, you do have like Hungary and Poland and stuff, but I still think those countries are eventually just going to give up and they're going to be just assumed into the Euro blender. I think eventually Putin will probably get overthrown and then Russia will just become part of the EU or part of some other super gay thing, and that's just kind of the future of the world. But in the meantime, you just have to kind of support. I don't think you have to support the lesser of two evils, but if something is actively good, even in a kind of a minor way, even if it's just punishing criminals, then you should support that. If it's like we should not punish crime slightly less, I guess, then you don't support that. But if something's like protecting freedom of speech, if it's like Texas law that limits social media censorship, you should go all in on that and fight on that. Because once again, like a lot of these things are very abstract, they're very future oriented. I could be wrong about them, but you have to kind of look at the practical on the ground issues where it's a society you have to live in and your kids are going to have to live in. So, regardless of what the long term future is, you have to survive the short term in order to worry about being destroyed by the long term, which I think is a pretty logical way of looking at it. So, thank you for listening to that extremely depressing pontification about a failed future. God bless everyone. Just try to stay safe and stay living or whatever. And I'll talk to you guys all real soon.